Hi everyone. In this video, I want to go over the supplies that I use for every scrappy quilt that I make. Now, this isn't the full list of supplies that you need in order to make any of my quilts, but it's just the general types of things that I use when I am making a scrappy quilt that help me with making that scrappy quilt. If you're new to my channel, I'm Blair Stalker. I am a quilt maker, an educator, and author, and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I am getting ready to begin the Dash sew along. Dash is my newest pattern at the time of this recording, and I wanted to go over a few of the things that I consider essential tools for making a scrappy quilt like what we are going to be making with the Dash pattern and really any of my patterns. The first thing I do when I am getting ready to make any new quilt pattern is I change my sewing machine needle. I was one of the apparel design majors in college that did all of my sewing homework for all 4 years without ever changing my sewing machine needle. I ended up breaking that machine, and one of the things I learned is that it's important to keep your sewing needle changed. I change my sewing needle on my sewing machine every time I start a new quilt. I was taught to change it with every 6 hours of sewing. I don't really pay attention to how many hours I sew. So I just, as a rule, change my sewing machine needle with every new quilt project. And the type that I use are Schmetz 80/20. Now I have a Juki 2010 that I sew on, and I use Aurifil thread, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But these needles work best for me. These are top stitch needles, and I have been using these for at least 10 years. And I sell these in my shop if you're interested, but you can get them all sorts of places as well. But I change my needle every time I start a new quilt project. When it comes to making a scrappy quilt with lots of different fabrics, I typically stick with one of these 3 thread colors that I'm going to be showing you. I use Aurifil 50 weight thread in my machine with my needle that I just showed you. It works great for me. And if I am making just a scrappy quilt like the Dash quilt here behind me with all sorts of fabrics in it, I will either go for one of these 2 colors. This is Aurifil color 5011, and this is Aurifil color 5021. So really these are about the same. They're a medium range shade, and the only color difference really is that 5021 is more of a gray if my fabrics are more on the blue cooler side range, and this one 5011 is more of a warmer tan. But really either one of these will work. If I am making a low volume value quilt like my Luminous Pyramids quilt, I'll use something lighter, and this is Aurifil 2310. It's just really like a creamy white, but those are the 3 colors that I choose from when I am stitching up a scrappy quilt like the one behind me or like all the ones in my shop. And as well, I will often use the same color that I use for the patchwork construction as the quilting thread, because I do minimal quilting on most of my quilts. It's not my favorite part. I could do a whole other video about that. Maybe I should. So I do minimal quilting. It's usually with my walking foot, and it's usually sort of outline quilting. And I will often use the color of thread that I used for the patchwork. Not required, but it certainly makes the experience of sewing up a quilt much more pleasant, is flattening spray. And my preferred brand is Flatter. This one is Pineapple Grove. I use this instead of using the steam on my iron. And I think that's just from habit. I had some steam mishap, rusty water or something like all of a sudden shot out. And so I prefer to just spray on something rather than use steam. I will use steam, but this smells a lot better. I don't like using starch, and I think that's because I come from a place where there's a lot of pests and things in the summertime, especially. They're attracted to the cornstarch in typical starch sprays. I know you can make your own. I have not tried that. So if you've tried that, let me know. I'm very curious. Let's talk about rotary cutters. Often in in-person workshops and things, I will see people that are sawing into their fabric when they're cutting it. I don't necessarily think that you have to change your rotary blade every time you start a new quilt. However, if you are sawing into your fabric, or if you're really struggling, you should get a new rotary blade, and it will be so much more satisfying to cut and a lot safer as well. My preferred rotary cutter is this Olfa one, and it has a safety lock on it. So I always put this safety lock on before I put it away in my drawer. And when you release the safety lock, the blade is only exposed when you press the handle like so. And so if I release the handle, it covers the blade. I, like many of you, may have started quilting back when my kids were younger and very curious about what I was doing. So it's always good to have a little extra protection. Now I have a kitty who likes to come in. Come here, say hi. Come here, say hi. Design walls. I know that often it's not possible to have a design wall. And I know I myself, for many years, did not have a design wall. Many years after that, I had a small design wall. Now I have a design wall in my studio, which you're looking at here. And this is the largest wall in my studio. And I actually marked this as my design wall from back when the studio wasn't even built yet. When you're making scrappy quilts, as this one behind me, you have to have a way to stand away from the design and look at it from different perspectives. The way that I make my scrappy quilts is I lay out the different fabrics into a block at my work table. And it looks one way when I'm looking down at it on my work table. It looks a very different way when you are able to put it on a design wall, mix it with other blocks that will be in the quilt, and stand back from it. And I should mention that the only thing I have on this design wall is a king size flannel sheet that I just trimmed the hemmed edges down on. I have an old tutorial, but still a good one, on my website on how to take a large piece of foam core and create a design wall, just so you can look at different groups of blocks together, even if you can't look at the entire quilt. It's super important to be able to have that perspective and to look at these quilts from different ways, because they are kind of optical illusions and they look different from a distance when you have a lot of blocks on a wall that you can stand back and look at. Now, a lot of times, if you do have a design wall of some sort, you often don't have a ton of room to stand back and really get a distance perspective on what you're looking at. So for that, I actually recommend using something like this, which is a door peephole. If you look through the peephole standing in front of your design, it gives you a distance perspective, like a reducing glass almost. I'm looking through it at this side of the room, and I can basically see this whole side of my studio. That's another trick that you can use to get some distance and perspective if you have a design wall and you can lay out. If you don't have a design wall, I would recommend using a white sheet, pinning your blocks to it, and then maybe temporarily just holding it up against a wall. You don't need to spend hours looking at it, but you need to be able to have some perspective. Anything that you can think of that would give you a little bit of perspective so that you can stand back and look at your blocks. Plus, it's just really cool to see how the designs of these scrappy quilts come together when you lay out all of the different blocks. These scrappy quilts that I design rely on color value more than actual color. It's helpful to have tools to trick your eyes so that you are able to focus on color value instead of color. Color is the first thing we see when we look at something like the quilt behind me. It's very difficult to not look at color when you're trying to check your values and things like that. That is why I invented my favorite tool, the Ruby ruler. So the red tint of this ruler allows you, when you hold it in front of your eyes, it allows you to not focus on individual colors, but instead focus on the forms that you're creating in the quilt. Because the values, the dark and the light values, are what you're using to create the form. If I am looking at something on the design wall, I will hold it like this and I will look at all of the different areas and I will say, does that look right? It seems like all of the values in that area maybe are a little bit too muted. Maybe I can move some blocks around and create a little more contrast in that area. Those are things I look at. And as well, when I am laying out an individual block on my work table, I want to make sure that if in these particular parts of the block I need a dark value, then I want to make sure that it's reading the way the pattern says it should. So I will often look at the individual block the same way as I would look at a group of blocks on the design wall. And I'll just make sure that everything is laid out correctly. Yes, you can also use your phone. You can take photos. You can change the setting of the photo that you take to black and white to give you another way to look at it. But it's important to have some sort of trick. And I say trick because that's really what it is. We're just providing visual tricks to prevent our eyes from just focusing on the individual colors so that we can focus on the value. And last but not least, the way that I have my patterns set up is that I want you to do all of your fabric pulling from your stash or gathering of your fabric at the same time. Then I want you to cut all or almost all of your fabrics at the same time. Then I want you to pull from those fabrics that you've cut previously and create your blocks at the same time. The reason I ask you to do it this way is because I think when you're batching your steps together, so when you're doing all the cutting and when you're doing all of the block layout and construction together as a batch, I think we have better accuracy and I think we're able to focus on it better. I encourage you to try it this way if you never have. You might find it works for you on a scrappy quilt like this. And I'd love to hear if it does. So I hope this has been helpful as you think about making a scrappy quilt with fabrics that you have from your stash or fabrics that you have gathered together for a specific scrappy project. And I will link below to the items that I've talked about that I do carry in my store in case you have trouble finding them. But I look forward to seeing what you make, and I'll see you soon.